Welcome to the Sales SOS podcast, where we answer your sales distress calls. I'm your host, Liz Heiman, bringing the rescue boat to your sales challenges. In this ever-changing sales environment, it's easy for leaders to feel adrift. We're here to be the beacon guiding you to success. Each episode, I'm joined by top sales experts and practitioners who have navigated this waters and come out victorious. Together, we'll uncover the insights and strategies that will help you hit your sales targets and grow your business. So if you're ready to turn your sales distress into sales success, you're in the right place. Let's dive into today's topic. Hi, this is Liz Heiman, and this is your Sales SOS podcast. I'm here with crew member Mike Simmons, and we're going to talk about sales process today. So in this first segment where we're talking about sales process, we're going to talk about what is sales process, why do we have it? Why does it matter? What do people think it is? So we're just going to have a conversation about that. And then we're going to stop and we're going to talk about some other issues in our next segments. So, Mike, we don't get to do this very often. So why don't you, since it's just the two of us, since it's July and everybody else is on vacation today, which is fabulous, Mike and I are going to talk about our favorite topic to disagree and agree about, and that is sales process. And it's really near and dear to both of our hearts because it's what helps us do the job that we do. And I think in this case, it's a good time to introduce ourselves and so everybody can understand why this is so important to us. So let me quick introduce myself. And then, Mike, I want you to take a little bit longer and just talk about what you do and why you do it. So I'm Liz Heiman. Bryn Tillman dubbed me the Sales Operating System Architect. And what I do is I help companies who are in transition, they're growing, whatever it is that's changing in their world, to really rethink their sales operations. Why are we doing what we do? How are we positioning ourselves? And I create what I call a sales operating system. And in that sales operating system, we talk about all the critical foundational items that you need in order to support a sustainable, productive sales organization. And that includes everything from what's the sales process, what's the CRM look like, what's your messaging, all the way through how do you manage and how do you grow accounts. So I'm building the process for those things. So that's what I do. Mike, tell us about you and why this topic is important to you.
Well, first off, I love the acronym SOSA. Like Sammy Sosa. We're going back into baseball. We're hitting balls out of the park. We're winning business. And I know a lot of times people get in and they start to connect sports and business and military stuff and business and all of these other stories that we connect with each other because they're relatable. Like we've gone through, everybody out there has experienced a bad sales process.
Yes.
And a lot of times Liz, how do you know it's a bad sales process as a buyer? How do you know it's a bad sales process as a buyer?
Oh, there's so many ways, but if it's uncomfortable for me as a buyer, it's a bad sales process.
Yeah, right. You feel like it's something that you're stuck inside their process, right? Like you're the one who's trying to buy something. You've got the problem. And there are a number of areas where Liz and I will be directly aligned on this stuff. And broadly speaking, we're aligned on what our objective is, which is help people solve problems. Get out there, like design for predictable results. This is where you get into the operating system. So my background is combination of operations, United Parcel Service for a number of years, then customer success before it was called customer success, then account executive type roles, both small, medium-sized business, and then enterprise, and then moved into sales leadership roles and then launched a business where I help organizations go to market, really simplifying their approach to leadership, culture, revenue, and execution. And the way that we can simplify our approach is by having an operating system. And that's where it's really cool to hear, be talking with the sales operating system architect who knows we have operating systems to help us create predictable results throughout the process. And the cool thing about systems, at least the way that I like to think of systems, and I'm a big people process tools kind of person, the tools and processes combined create your system.
Right.
Yep. So, I'm the guy that helps people address the revenue challenge when they're struggling, figuring out how to create that growth inside their business. And many times that revenue challenge is actually a culture challenge in disguise, and culture starts with leadership. And that's where all of this kind of comes back into that execution piece.
And it's really interesting how much culture weaves through this sales process and rears its ugly head sometimes in the middle of it. So let's just start at the beginning. Mike, what's a sales process? What on earth do we mean by this word? And what's interesting, and Mike's kind of laughing because that is not a simple question. It's not like I just said, what's a piece of chalk? Like, what's a sales process?
Yeah. So I think the first question that you have to ask when that question comes up, and I know people don't like it when you answer a question with a question, but the answering a question with a question is more about validating understanding, getting some kind of an alignment. And that's part of a sales process that we do when we're going through kind of a little bit of discovery. And discovery might be a portion of the thing that happens inside a sales process. I don't think discovery is a stage. I think discover happens all the way throughout. If you're not discovering, you're not learning. But to get back to your question, the definition of sales process changes depending on whether or not you're looking at from the buyer perspective, the person who has the problem, that customer journey, the organization perspective, how we do what we do, or how we create a predictable forecast, how we forecast what we're going to do. And then the third group is the rep, how the rep does the work that they do. And unfortunately, there are a lot of people like us who are out in the marketplace who confuse the heck out of people because we talk about process and we're talking about the rep, or we talk about process and we're talking about forecasting, or we talk about process and we're talking about the customer, but we don't clarify that here we're talking about buyer journey, or here we're talking about sales process for forecasting, or here we're talking about sales rep approach. So that's one big piece. If you break it down though and say sales, so sales is about solving problems, connecting the dots between problems that are known and unknown. That's my definition of it. And then process is a series of steps that, if done in a order, create a predictable outcome. If at any point in time that order gets cut or that order fails or things stop, then typically you're not going to get to the outcome that you were looking for. And if you're just kind of going after it and things happen organically in the way that you sell, you do not have you have an organic sales process that is not transferable to others, and you're in a lot of trouble.
Yeah. So what's really interesting about that is the tradition that I come out of, which is the Miller-Heiman tradition. And for those of you who are following us and don't know this yet, my dad is Steve Heiman and wrote Strategic Selling, he and Bob Miller wrote it. But what my dad used to say and still says is, I did not go and create a sales process. I did not go and create something. What I did was go identify what is it that the best salespeople do, and I turned it into something that is a process that is repeatable. And so if we look at successful salespeople and we look at struggling or inconsistent salespeople, what we find is successful salespeople tend to go through the same process all the time. Does that mean it doesn't change order ever? Sure it does. Things flip and flop on you in the sales process, but they consistently do the same thing, and they do things that make them successful. Inconsistent salespeople are very reactive, and they do whatever's happening at the time. Really, somebody called me, I'll do this. Somebody asked me, I'll do this. It's this sort of, instead of it's time to do this, and it's time to do this, and now I need to understand this, and this is the next step, and here we go from here. And it's repeatable. Wash and rinse, fold and dry, put it back in. Yeah, I'm going to do household chores, and you're going to do sports. Everybody's going to love you better, Mike.
Well, no, but it's true. Like, we relate to these things. So there's Liz, how often do you get a chance to work with people who are like, I'm just not very process driven. I don't like processes. That's not my thing. Does that ever happen to you?
Oh, all the time. And what's really interesting is there's this myth about salespeople. Good salespeople think on their feet. Good salespeople, they're just naturals. Good salespeople just know what to say to people. And good salespeople can just close a deal because they have so much personality. And Mike, if you're listening to us, you can see Mike can barely stand up straight. He's laughing so hard, right? No, this isn't true. This isn't true. A natural salesperson is not somebody who just wings it, flying by the seat of their pants all the time, hoping and praying. You cannot make a good living on hopes and prayers. You can't run a business on hopes and prayers.
You can't scale. How would you build scale? Like, imagine if everybody just walked in the door. It's like, what am I going to do today? No, what am I going to do today?
And that's what most people do. And they walk in the door, and what's the very first thing most salespeople do? Most people do when they walk in the door to the office. They sit down at their desk or they flip on their computer, however you call getting to work that day. What's the very first thing everybody does?
Check email.
Check email. What happens when you check email?
All of a sudden, you're working for somebody else. You're dealing with the fires of whatever somebody else has obviously made your priority.
Everybody else's priority becomes your priority. And so all of those things that you should be doing, all of those priorities that you set up in your CRM, all of that follow-up, all of that research, gone. And you're going to spend your day putting out fires, right? You're going to spend your day reacting to what everybody else thinks is so urgent that may or may not be important. And what happens when we do that is this dopamine thing happens, right? So rather than getting my dopamine and adrenaline hits by doing my sales work that helps drive my success, I'm going to get my dopamine and adrenaline hits by reacting to everything that's going on and getting all upset and excited by the things that my customers are saying and doing, and get totally trapped in and caught in that and never get to the part that really is priorities. So your sales process drives your daily priorities and daily activity is what we're saying.
Yeah. And think about it. So a lot of people, everybody has a computer. Well, excuse me. Most people have a computer. They're working on a computer. We're doing this with computers in front of us. Computers have an operating system. That operating system routes stuff. It allows you to use resources effectively. It determines where do you want to throttle things up and put more power, and where do you want to slow some things down and maybe conserve a battery. So to Liz's point, is she was talking at the beginning, your sales system or your sales organization should also have an operating system that will allow you to throttle certain things up, back off certain things, understand where some resource limitations are. And a key component of that is this thing that we're talking about, which is a sales process. So how do you define sales process?
So the sales process are the steps, the activities, the steps and activities that a salesperson needs to go through in order to close a deal, to get a deal, from getting a deal to closing a deal, or identifying an opportunity to closing an opportunity, which is a word I prefer. Yep. So it's everything that needs to be done along the way. And a sales process has defined stages. It has rules for moving between stages. It has a list of activities that go with each stage. It has a list of questions that need to be answered at each stage. And it has a list of tools that are needed for the salesperson to be effective in each of those stages. And
this all feels so complicated. Like, what do you mean? I have to answer all questions and I have to do all of these things. It's so complicated. I just go in there and I smile and I talk with people and I get deals done.
Yeah. Well, what happens when we don't follow a process is we miss critical steps. And so one of the things about having a sales process is it helps the sales leaders and the salespeople identify where deals are falling apart. And if you don't follow a process, you are more likely to get surprises at the end. Well, he really liked me. We were having a great conversation. I knew we were going to get it. I have no idea what happened. And you can't know what happened because you didn't ask the questions to understand what could go wrong, what could stop the sale. So those questions about, hey, who wouldn't want this to buy this? what could get in the way of us closing this deal? What are your biggest concerns about implementing this technology? When we don't ask those questions, when they're not part of the sales process and we don't ask them, we get surprises. So when we have, and I'm not saying that you have to ask every single question every single time. I'm not suggesting that your sales process is a list of questions through which you drag your customer kicking and screaming, and you have to ask every single one because heaven forbid you forget to ask one of the questions. That's like, no, this is not what we're talking about. I'm not talking about a script. I'm not talking about having to say exactly this, or when you ask this, or what you say when someone does this. Those are great guides that we can have to help us do things better, but your sales process just helps you to understand at this stage, it's important to understand and know these things. At this stage, it's important to deliver this information. At this stage, the sales rep is going to need a tool that will help them write a proposal. At this stage, the sales rep probably is going to need a list of answers or ways to discuss objections. At this stage, they might need a bunch of success stories. Like, what do you need during each part of the buying process in order to support that person, the salesperson and the buyer, to make them successful? And I think this is, Mike, you started with this earlier and didn't say it like really, really outright, which is if your sales process does not match the buyer journey, you will not be successful. And what you will do is drag your buyer kicking and screaming through your sales process, probably unsuccessfully.
And when you do it, it doesn't necessarily have to like match up perfectly. It does need to be aligned. And when you think about it, you should get into those situations, and should's a tough word, but what I want to do when I look at both of those is I want to see how does our sales process enable the way we go to market and the way we do our work to close business, enable each of the conversions that I want to see happen on the buyer journey side. So I have to design for that buyer journey, I have to design for that enablement component. And then that third piece, and this is the one where I think a lot of people really screw up the sales process stuff, but can find a lot of value in if they do it really well. And this is where you get into the piece that Liz was talking about, having clear exit criteria in each of those stages. Every time I exit a stage, that's past tense. I've exited that stage. Your probability of sale should increase each time you exit the stage that gets you closer to closed won. And that's how you create an accurate forecast inside your business. You have all of the stuff, and it's right behind me. If I turn this way, it's right behind me. There's this funnel that kind of goes down, and we see at the top PC, pipeline created. That's the primary metric that I look for in sales teams. Like, what are we doing to create new opportunities? And then the next phase is pipeline develop. How are those things moving through each of the stages? And as they go through it, how is our probability of sale increasing? That helps us with forecasting. It's not a time thing. None of these stages are time bound, but you can look at the data and start to say, hey, it's kind of weird that customers, if you get really good data, customers in this segment buying these types of products with these types of problems tend to stall in this stage. Maybe we can enable them in one way, shape, or form to convert through that, or come up with a different way to reduce friction in the process or something there. But this is where all that data really becomes helpful.
Yeah. So let's back up for a second, because we've just made a huge leap from sales process to what do you do with it?
Yeah.
So Mike just described one of the things that we do when we have a really good sales process that everyone uses consistently, following the same set of rules and definitions. Then we have consistent data in the CRM. That consistent data in the CRM enables us as leaders, or looking at our own pipeline, to start making decisions. Hey, we make it a discovery. Hey, these guys always get stuck here. Let's figure out what we need to do differently. Wow, these companies, the velocity they go through the funnel is much faster than these kinds of companies. Or, hey, if we start the buying process earlier, the buying cycle is much longer, but our close ratios are much higher. So when we have data that's consistent, because we have a consistently documented sales process that everybody agrees on, then we have all of this information, and that enables the company to better support the salesperson by identifying what's going wrong. It also allows them to identify, I noticed this one sales rep always gets stuck here. What support does that one sales rep need to not get stuck here anymore? Yep. Or, hey, we're putting all of this group into, these kinds of buyers into the top of the funnel, and they're never closing. So maybe that's not our ideal customer, or maybe our language is wrong, or whatever. So that's one thing, is when you have a sales process and everybody's using it and the CRM is accurate, tons of data. The other side of it, as a sales rep, why are you burdening me with this sales process that just takes time, and you want all this information, and you want me to put in next actions, and you want all of this stuff from me? And if we turn it around as a salesperson and say, what do I really need in order to stay on top of the 100 leads or more, or opportunities or deals that are in my funnel, then I can start to say, I have a ton of work. It needs to be prioritized. I cannot remember it. I cannot remember what I talked to that person about 6 months ago, or where we left things, unless you have a photographic memory. You just can't manage 100 different conversations. And if it's 100 deals, it may be 300 different conversations or 400 different conversations. If you can remember those as a human being, you are superhuman. And we should be studying your brain, because it's just not humanly possible. So what does this process do for me? Well, one, it helps me think about next logical steps. So if I have a sales process and I have rules around that sales process, so at this stage, we do certain things, we provide certain things, we ask certain questions, then there's a natural progression that I can follow. The second thing is, I can say, when I'm writing my to-do list, my next actions for each one of those deals in the sales process, that's somewhere in the sales process, it helps me to think about what's my next logical step. Now I document that, give myself a reminder, and voila, I open up my work one day and it is all prioritized, and I know what to do next. And I can also look at my sales process, I can look at my CRM, and I can say, wow, I have not been doing the work at the top of my sales funnel or the prospecting, and I don't have enough stuff to hit my goals in 6 months. If it is not documented in there, if you do not know what your sales math is and be able to see it through the sales process, you can never make discoveries like that quickly and easily. So at any given time, I should have a pretty good idea about whether or not I'm going to hit my goals at any given time in the next 6 to 9 months.
Well, definitely. And the cool thing about documenting it, as much as I didn't find CRM religion, and it really was like Salesforce religion at the time, because the original CRM I was in was Siebel, and I know we're going to talk about CRMs a little bit later, but I didn't find Salesforce religion until I started leading teams. And then the conversation was, look, if you get this stuff in the system, then we don't need to have conversations about it. If you don't have it in the system, then we have to have conversations. So you can actually reduce the amount of time that we need to talk if you've got the information in there. And when you have the information in there, it will enable you to perform in your role. I mean, how many people have ever lost their keys in their house?
I never, ever have ever lost my keys in my house or in my hand.
Yeah.
So in my purse.
If we have a process, when we walk in the door, we hang them on the key hanger, and we always follow that process, then we'll consistently be able to find them when we walk out the door. And we laugh about it because it's simple, and we know that this kind of stuff happens. So I think one of the biggest challenges that we as leaders create on behalf of our team is we overcomplicate these processes just for the sake of process, because it makes us feel good and warm and fuzzy, because we created this amazing mechanical thing that ultimately turns into a nightmare and starts to look like one of those mousetrap games that you have, where it's got to go through the tunnel and around the world and hit the string and drop the weight and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. So one is to make it as simple as possible, but as complete as possible to support. And the idea here, again, is your sales process supports your salesperson to be successful. And that's what we want to do. So I want to wrap this up. So, a sales process is a tool that enables salespeople, sales managers, sales leaders, company leaders to understand what is happening along the buyer journey and the seller journey. And it helps us to make good decisions. It helps us to prioritize our work. And it helps us in a very, very noisy world with too much information and too many inputs to quickly and easily identify what I need to do next, and not have to, again, remember. We can't remember. So our sales process helps us stay on top of it. So in our next segment, when you join us there, we will be talking about the stages, and we're going to be talking about mistakes. So thanks for joining Mike and me for your Sales SOS podcast. And we'll see you when we go to our next topic.
And that's a wrap of this episode of the Sales SOS podcast. A huge thank you to our experts for throwing us a lifeline with their insights. We hope today's episode has equipped you to navigate the sales seas with confidence. Never miss an episode. Subscribe to the Sales SOS podcast on your favorite platform. If you have questions, comments, or topics you'd like us to explore, join us live on LinkedIn every second Friday, or share your questions on YouTube or LinkedIn. Until next time, keep sailing towards those sales goals. I'm Liz Heiman, your captain here at the Sales SOS podcast, saying smooth sailing and successful selling.